What's up, YouTube? What's up, everybody out there in TV land? Hope you're all having an awesome start to your week so far. So before I get started, I just wanted to say huge thanks to everybody. The YouTube channel growth has been phenomenal. Couldn't do it without the help of everybody watching the videos, checking out what's going on, all the new subscribers, all the new interactions with the videos, people liking stuff, commenting. Absolutely fantastic for helping out the algorithms and helping the channel grow. So greatly appreciate it. Thanks to all y'all. We can keep doing regular video updates instead of long delays of not really knowing what's going on. So just wanted to give that shout out. Otherwise, if you have been enjoying the videos or you enjoy the content, consider subscribing on YouTube. It does not cost you anything. Just lets you know whatever new videos are getting posted, so you can come check those out. So that's it for my call to action. Let's get on to the important part, which is the Death Shadow stuff that I'm sure is the entire reason that you're here in the first place. So I had my little break, played a little Grixis, some Rakdos, stuff like that. I still have a couple more videos to upload from that. But back to Murktide, or not back to Murktide, back to Dimir, trying to figure out what I want my threat combination to be. And as you probably know, if you've been checking out any of the Discords, which another shout out down below in the description, we've got the deck list. We've got a link to the Cntrlfreak Discord in case you want to come over and talk about Dimir or other variations of Shadow. Got the Twitter, so you know when live streams are happening. That's the first place it gets updated. And the Twitch itself, in case you want to come see a live stream whenever we do have the chance to run through one. But if you've been seeing on any of the Discords, the whole rage right now is trying to figure out what kind of threat combination do you want. Do you want Psychic Frog and Murktide? Do you want Nethergoyf and Tamiyo? Do you want Nethergoyf and Psychic Frog? Do you want Tamiyo and Murktide? What are we running? What are we doing? Are we running Street Wraith? Are we not running Street Wraith? And so I'm just like mad dash cycling through different options. Because at the end of the day, I don't know what we need to be running. I can only tell you what's been working or hasn't working for me. Other people have had varying experiences that I love to hear about. So as always in the comments, if you're having some configuration that's working for you, let us know. Say something. We can't build and develop if we don't have input from everybody. So this video, I was trying out the Nethergoyf Psychic Frog combination, which I honestly don't think I've tried before. I've done like Nethergoyf, a few Tamiyos, and a couple Psychic Frogs, but I've never cut the Tamiyos entirely and gone Nethergoyf Psychic Frog. So I wanted to see kind of how that would play out. Most of the rest of the main deck, 75, pretty constant from what I've been running, like a lot of 4-ofs. I really enjoy being able to play a lot of 4-ofs in current Shadow iterations. So like the 4 Bauble, 4 Street Wraith, 4 Preordained for a lot of our drawing and filtering. Also card types for Nethergoyf. Since we're not running Murktide, Psychic Frog doesn't necessarily care about card types. So we can kind of freely run all those good Nethergoyf enablers. The 4 Shadow, 4 Nethergoyf, 3 Psychic Frog, because I really don't want to see multiples of Psychic Frog. It's cool if you have 2 and your opponent's on like Storm or something and you can hit them with 2 frogs and draw 2 cards. But the more likely scenario is you have 2 frogs and you need to get the game over with and you can only discard to 1. So that second frog is just kind of like hanging around. But 4 counterspell, 4 of what I would consider like my negate effects, the 3 Stubborn Denial and the Force Negation. Force has been really excellent against things like Eldrazi for being able to interact with turn 1 Chalice, turn 2 Trinisphere, things like that. Also really good against any sort of unfair matchup like Living End or Storm. 2 copies of Drown and Lock, 4 Thoughtseize, 4 Fatal Push, and a Dismember. Recently, I've been on and off of like a Blood Chief's Thirst in the main deck, and I think Hummingbird from the Metacord's been kind of the same opinion. It's a really good card to have against the energy variants because you put so much pressure on yourself to interact the first couple of turns so that you don't fall behind to something like Ocelot Pride or Guide of Souls, or worse, one of those into like an Ajani. You have to be interacting on turn one. You just cannot afford to let that turn go by and let your opponent start establishing some significant tempo. In the sideboard, 2 more Force Negation, 3 Stern Scolding, a Flusterstorm, 3 Consigned to Memory. As Eldrazi is getting more and more popular, I could very well see that Stern Scolding becoming a 4th Consigned to Memory. Meat Hook Massacre is a card I've been trying out for mostly the energy matchups, but like Yawgmoth and stuff to an extent as well, just to not only act as a sweeper, but one that you don't have to pay life into, like Toxic Deluge, where you might be aggressively low on life before you get to cast it, but also allows you to stabilize your life total a little bit. It can be awkward with Shadow at times, but it's fine with Nethergoyf Psychic Frog. So the hope is that you can just like discard your Psychic or your Shadows to Psychic Frog if your life total is too high, or more realistically is that you're down it to 8, you wrath your opponent's board, you go up to like 12, 13, and they start hitting you again. Now you play out your Shadows and go from there. 2 Toxic Deluge, because as much as I appreciate the life gain off Meat Hook Massacre, having a 3-mana sweeper is still very, very nice. Bloodchief's Thirst on the side, which I said kind of between the side and the main. And then 2 copies of Unlicensed Hearse. I have been really liking the Hearse as a way to interact with graveyards without shutting off of Drown the Lock, but also not having to like proactively pop something like a Nihil Spellbomb. I do think Hearse is worse in multiples than like Spellbomb is, but I've also won a few games just crewing and attacking, so that's never a non-factor. So anyway, that's the current list we're doing the voiceover for here. Let's go ahead and hop in to show off some of the games, and we can kind of talk about decision points and changes I might make while the matches are going on. So through the magic of CGI, we have round number 1. Totally not coughing into the microphone. So really good opening hand. I know it doesn't have a threat, but I do have the ability to like filter my draws pretty well with Bauble, my fetch land, Street Wraith. I've got early interaction, stub on turn 1, counterspell on turn 2. The hand is really just looking for a threat, but with my ability to kind of filter a little bit here, I shouldn't have too much problem finding something. Eldrazi Temple out of our opponent could make things awkward. It means that they can't have turn 1 Chalice of the Void, which is huge. So I do get a chance to at least untap with Stub, have something for like Trinisphere. Preordain's nice. Want to see what I got coming off the top. Well, I usually consider just going ahead and cycling Street Wraith there, but it's a matchup dependent play, and when I cycle Street Wraith, it's for the purpose of trying to find something that I want to do right now, but because I have Stubborn Denial, I would rather hold up Stub for like a turn 2 Chalice on 1 or a Talisman or something than Thoughtseize and risk my opponent having 2 things. So if I Thoughtseize and they've got a Chalice and a Talisman, then I'm kind of screwed one way or the other. But if I hold up Stub, then I give myself the chance to interact with whatever my opponent does go for, and then go back to my turn, and maybe I find a Thoughtseize, or if I already had one, I could Thoughtseize then and take both of the things. We'll Stub one, Thoughtseize the other, and then focus on finding a threat from there. So as we thought, they had a 2-drop play. We get to stub that, so a little bit of tempo regaining there. Then here we'll just hold up Counterspell instead of going for Preordain, because we're going to have the Preordain next turn. But if we can counter like a Thought-Knot Seer or something this turn, it could be a big deal. The Rumble, I don't really know what they're getting off Rumble, but I kind of like the idea of just aggressively counterspelling it, because it not only takes up their entire turn, it stops them from getting the Scion token, so they can't go like land 2-4 off the temple, 5 off their card in hand, 6 off the forest, 7 off the spawn, and cast like a Devourer and just exile whatever I play. Preordain finds another Nethergoyf and a Counterspell. So we're just going to jam a couple Nethergoyfs here, draw a Counterspell next turn, and hope that's enough to kind of tempo out. Looks like our opponent does not have anything to follow up, so we'll take more Counterspells, cycle Street Wraith to grow our Nethergoyfs, attack in for 10. This is what we got, and we managed to sneak away with a Game 1 win. So winning Game 1 against Eldrazi is really nice. There's a really good chance in the matchup that you're just going to have an opening hand with like Fatal Pushes and Drowning Locks and stuff. And that sucks, but there's really nothing you can do about it. So you're going to drop a lot of Game 1 to Eldrazi just having a wrong half of the deck problem, which is why I do think it's really important to keep Game 1 hands with a game plan. It doesn't necessarily mean like mull aggressively to a Thoughtseize and a threat, but like we saw that last hand, I guess the best way I can explain it is dividing your deck into 3 parts. You've got your lands, need lands to cast your spells. You can't have a hand without lands. Your threats, we're a combat-oriented deck. We win games by turning dudes sideways and getting our opponent dead. And then everything else kind of falls into a support role. You've got interactive support. You've got like threat-finding support. And you can't keep a hand without at least 2 of those things. And usually if you're going on the support route and you don't have a threat, I would lean towards more of your threat finding support, but then that's just your draw spells. But what you can't do is keep a hand that's got like 3 lands, 2 counterspell, a stubborn denial, and a fatal push, and then you're at the mercy of the top of your deck with no threats or anything like that, unless you know the matchup. But Game 1, it becomes significantly more important to look for those hands that are able to provide lands, a threat, a way to get that threat online. And then if you can get a support card or 2, that's great. But really, lands, threat, get the threat going. So I hope that helps a little bit with mulligan decisions. Sideboarding against Eldrazi. I feel like I've had a pretty straightforward sideboard plan in these matchups. Like Fatal Push is coming out, Drowning Locks coming out, boarding in Force Negations. If you're running Flusterstorm, boarding that in because it does hit Kozilek's Command, which is a nightmare card to deal with. Consigned to Memories coming in. If you're running Harbinger of the Seas, those are coming in. So we got an opener with a Force Negation. I could force a Utopia Sprawl, but that doesn't sound like the most interesting thing in the world to force. See, double 1 rings. So we've got a turn 2 threat. We've got force backup to deal with the 1 ring. We could just like play out our counterspell here. Which it looks like I decided to do. Drawing another counterspell is obviously nice. Myco Spawn's pretty annoying, but I probably would have liked to see myself play out a threat and just force last turn. So I could get the clock running. Like, yeah, I lose a counterspell, but I also cut a turn off the clock. Here I'm like giving multiple extra draw steps. Which, Undercity Sewers, I will absolutely say, I love the card, but I seem to draw it, like naturally draw it, so more often than I ever care to. So, opponent puts an Eldrazi Temple in their hand off of a Malevolent Rumble. Got a Shadow and a Goyf. We have to go shields down for a turn, but since we know, at least at the moment, they didn't have anything, we're just kind of playing the odds there and saying, I don't think you're going to draw anything this turn. Conveniently, they did not, so now we just have Counterspell Force and hope they don't play something like a Devourer of Destiny. Myco Spawn is annoying, but fine. Counter it to not let them chump block for a turn. You gotta, a lot of times when it comes down to decisions on whether or not to counter something, you have to think about it in terms of how is this affecting my clock. So if I counter the Myco Spawn there, I have a 2-turn clock with the Shadow and the Nethergoyf. Hit them for 8 this turn. Hopefully force negation something. Untap, hit them for 8 again. Game's over. If I let the Myco Spawn resolve, that 2-turn clock becomes a 3-turn clock. So now I have to attack in. Maybe they block one. Maybe they take it. Either way, I get them down to either 11 or 7. And then if they don't block last turn, they have to block the next turn. If they do block, then I don't have lethal the next turn. And you kind of have to base some of those judgment calls on that. Like, am I okay having to draw another counter spell if they find something else? Or do I think there's enough dead draws or I have enough coverage, like the force negation, to force the issue and get through with lethal? And in this case, I'm saying, like, hey, I think I can get you dead with this force negation. So I'm just going to let you have your next draw instead of giving you 2 draws and hope Counterspell Force is good enough. Because if my opponent just draws like a... if they draw a Devourer... if I let them have an extra draw step and they draw a Devourer, the game's probably over because I just can't deal with Devourer. So it makes more sense to limit the variability there by giving them 1 draw step instead of multiple. All right, on to match number 2. Looks like we're up against an Eldrazi opponent again, which we've got a Thoughtseize into a Frog. Let's check out their hand. We take a map, leave them with a mine, a couple mines, a forest, talisman. Which, yeah, they get down the talisman. They find a tower, but I get a frog, so let's see how it plays out. A lot of my cards, game 1 especially, are just dead, so I'm like, fine, throwing stuff aggressively at the frog. Opponent naturally top decks the tower and the power plant, so they're able to just cast a Devourer there and exile our frog. Which is sad, but that's how it plays out sometimes. I will say that the Eldrazi variations that are lower on... I'll talk about this real quick. The Eldrazi variations that are lower on creatures are much better matchups than the ones that are like Thoughts or Thought-Knot. Headset like going dead there. The variations with creatures are worlds worse than the variations without creatures. Being able to have so many cast triggers and stuff like that's a lot tougher to deal with. So sometimes you have to make considerations for that. Let's get back. But as far as the turn 1 play there, I decided to hold up Stub or Consign to deal with like a Chalice or something. If I play out Frog or if I play out like Preordain and they have a Chalice, then the game's just kind of over for me there, which I don't want it to be. So, you know, I'm going to try to not have it be. But this is a lot of... Man, I would really like to see a second land. Do find a second land. We have to consign a map because I cannot afford for my opponent to get their third Tron land online right now. And I could have played out a Shadow last turn, but I was afraid that if they just top decked any fourth land, they'd be able to play a one ring out. And if they play out a one ring, I'm in a world of trouble. Uggin's Labyrinth, pretty good top deck. So we might go spawn to get their last Tron land. Counter a one ring, and now we're like... Hope we can get there. Attacking with our shadows. So our opponent should just go for Devourer here. Exile a shadow, have a blocker. Instead, they decide to go for the All is Dust, and we have Stubborn Denial. So, on to game number 3. Love to see that. Love to see our opponent have a chance to just kill us and not. One of those hands, it's got lands, it's got good interaction with the Force. We're just hoping we can find a threat with Street Wraith and Preordain. But that does give us a pretty good amount of looks. Thoughtseize away a one ring. Opponent's lands, not the most menacing combination of lands here. I'm pretty okay, like, being aggressive with this Preordain, trying to find a threat, which we do. So, it's a slow threat. And this is one of these situations like... go away. This is one of these situations that I really want to key in on and figure out, okay, is Frog better than Tamiyo right here? Tamiyo would be pretty nice at getting to flip right there. And then I can just start like ticking Tamiyo up with Force Negation back up. That way, if they do find a land for this one ring, I've got Force, and that's fine. But Tamiyo providing a, like, effectively 4-turn clock. Because she would flip right there with draw for turn, Preordain, Finder, player out, cycle Street Wraith, flip the Tamiyo. So we'd be looking, we were what? Turn 2 there? Turn 2 would have flipped her. Looking at turn 5 ult. Against an uninteractive deck with Force, Flusterstorm. So, pretty good chance we'd make it to the ult. 2 hard Force Negations. Let me see. Is Devourer of Destiny... Does it say creature? Does it say, like, non-land permanent? Devourer of Destiny... Exile target permanent that's one or more colors. So if we're able to keep them off of Devourer of Destiny, then Tamiyo ult like wins the game. Frog doesn't really change that. Like Frog's a very slow clock in a matchup like this. Because in this case we're getting it down on 3. Let's say we discard Island, Watery Grave. Then we're looking at a 3, then a 4. 3, 4, 5, 6. Still not lethal, right? 3 and 4 is 7. 5 and 12. 6 is 18. So yeah, still not lethal with that. Keep a Force Negation on top just because, hey, it's Force Negation. Start discarding some stuff to Frog because we got to get the game over with. This is definitely the kind of point of the game that Frog, to me, doesn't look all that good. I hate that I had to burn the Flusterstorm to ditch the Frog. I probably could have just kept it around. But This is, like I said, the part of the game that Frog looks really awkward to me. And maybe I'm not playing it right because I was getting really aggressive, like discarding the land when I had Stubborn Denial. But at the same time, my opponent's got a Devourer of Destiny that I know about. And I can't win without like going all in on this Frog, which means I have to put a bunch of cards into it, hope that it draws me into a consigned to memory by the time that it matters. Now, if we did have a Tamiyo, we would have ulted last turn. They would have had a Thought Knot, though, so they could have attacked at the Tamiyo. Depends on if we found something else to block or something. So, I don't know. It's still really, really close. And I know that's like matchup bias a little bit, where I'm just kind of saying, oh, Frog wasn't great in this situation, in this matchup. But we end up kind of drawing dead there, and I decided to scoop to the big thing, the Devourer. So, on to match number 3. Looks like we're up against a Necro Dominance deck. They top deck a Thoughtseize. Kind of rude to take our second Thoughtseize. Now, we know they have a Necro Dominance, but we do have a third Thoughtseize. Just kind of hoping we can get under a removal spell right here, and then be able to Thoughtseize away the other Necro Dominance. So we do. Get down another shadow, opponent draws dead, blah, 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 blah. Boring game there, because triple Thoughtseize, double shadow just kind of gets stuff over with. Which, I know I've said it in so many videos before, and I cannot stress it enough. If you are drawn to the shadow archetype, that's the kind of game that I think should really, like, get your heart racing. Because I will stand by it every chance that I get, and I will shout it from the mountaintops, that what draws me to Shadow more than anything else is the fact that there are games where it does not matter how good of a hand your opponent has. You just go like Thoughtseize into Thoughtseize Shadow into Counterspell second Shadow or whatever, and just win the game on like turn 4. After a bunch of good disruption. And I think those games are like the reason that you play Shadow. But back to it. Mono black Necro Dominance, sideboarding, boarding out like a lot of stuff that 2-for-1's myself. So Force Negation, I don't really want access to. I trim on some Fatal Pushes. Usually if they've got like a Grief start, they're taking your Fatal Push anyway. Fatal Push, I don't really care about Fatal Pushing a Bowmaster most of the time. It's okay against Shieldred, but I would rather counterspell Shieldred than rely on Fatal Push. And I do still have like Dismember, Drown and Lock, stuff like that. So I still have interaction for Shieldred. I'm boarding in Stern Scoldings, because they answer Grief, they answer Bowmaster, Dolphy, if that's something that you see. And then boarding in Flusterstorm, because it answers not only like Thoughtseize, but like the big X spell, March of Wretched Sorrow, as well as random spot removal spells here and there. Pretty good opening hand. We've got some lands. We've got some interaction. The important thing is we've got interaction for a turn 3 Necro Dominance. And if my opponent does go for a Bowmaster, that's kind of cool. Like, I think in this matchup, people from the Shadow side a lot of times like pay too much respect to Bowmaster. It's a good card, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, with like Shadow and Nethergoyf, you don't really care about a couple 1/1s. If you get a threat down, you're going to be forcing those 1/1s into chump block duty like ASAP. So don't be afraid to like let Bowmaster resolve, take a hit or two. And I also wouldn't be terrified to just like throw draw spells into it, because at the end of the day, they're just making one big token, and you can usually kill the token with like Fatal Push, Drown, stuff like that. So sack off the token, go for a Shieldred. They have a follow-up Necro Dominance. We'll go ahead and counter that too, and that'll allow us to like untap, play a Nethergoyf, hold up Counterspell, or since we found another land, we can play out the Frog, hold up Counterspell. Hey look, it's another Shieldred. That's cool. Kill off the Bowman just so I don't have to deal with extra bodies. I could ignore it, but like I've got Counterspell, I've got an active Frog. Why not just lean into that? Got a 1 ring. Counterspell that, and opponent's off of it and just scoops. I guess they didn't want to fight through the Frog, though I feel like they could have. They just top decked another Necro Dominance or another 1 ring. The illustrious Twitter keep, or Twitch keep, every time I keep a hand like this, I try to point out that if I'm in a real event, like if I'm in a challenge, if I'm at an RCQ or something, I am not keeping this hand. Like if I see no lands on 7, I'm auto throwing it back. I don't care if I have 4 Street Wraiths. More often than not, if you don't hit that land, the game is just over. Don't risk it. But when it comes to playing leagues on Magic Online, my entire goal is to test the boundary of a deck. How well can the deck perform when things aren't going perfectly, when the chips are stacked against you? And when I look at this hand, I see, okay, if I find any one land, then this hand is completely unlocked. Like even a Sink into Stupor to cast Preordained. Something like that. I've got hand completely unlocked. I'm ready to go. I've got interaction. I've got threats. Let's give it a shot. So, as you all can probably guess, that means we're not going to hit the land. But we get to see Architects of Will on our opponent's side. They go for 3 Street Wraiths instead of our 2, so they were cheating, clearly. Opponent sent me a message during this and was like, oh no, you too, or something to that effect. And I was like, well, it's not a mirror match. And then they said something about like, oh no, keeping a no land Street Wraith hand. I was like, fair. So both of us kept hands with no actual lands in Street Wraith. They just happened to find the Sink into Stupor, which we found a 3rd land. Go for a Thoughtseize. Try to bait like a Force Negation or something here, and then we can force them. So, triple Shardless Agent, Subtlety, double Force Negation. Really good hand. They don't have the 3rd land. Their hand is really redundant. I've got Force Negation to fight over this first living end on their side. If they don't hit the land this turn, that's fantastic for me. If they do hit it, which we all know they're going to hit it, like this isn't the first time we've played Shadow, then I do have Force Negation for this one. I've got like a Stubborn Denial for the next one. And they can't Force Negation on their own turn, so I know my counter spells are going to be somewhat safe. Sequencing. So my opponent's got a Subtlety that I know about. They've got 2 Force Negations and another Shardless Agent. I know they're 4 cards perfectly. I could lead on a Thoughtseize, and that sets up, if they want to go for Force Negation, ditch like Subtlety, ditch the 2nd Force Negation, I could maybe play out a threat, but I can't cast anything at that point. If they go for a Subtlety here on the Shadow, If they go for subtlety on the shadow, then I can decide between risking them not having a 4th land and hold up stub, or just go for Thoughtseize, at which point they either have to let me take the Shardless Agent or they have to discard it to a Force Negation. And I get to clear the board and then have like my threat next turn plus Stubborn Denial. And they are empty-handed and have to top deck the 4th copy of Shardless Agent because they don't have like white or red mana or anything to cast any of their other Cascade spells. So more than likely it gives me a free turn to untap and get back on the board. If they let this Shadow resolve, then I can just sit on Stubborn Denial and not do anything else because I know that I can stub a Living End on their turn and Force Negation doesn't do anything for me or for them. So they end up letting the Shadow resolve and I, again, just pass with stub. Like, you got to deal with this. I don't have to deal with your stuff yet. Generous Ent for basic forest. I'm kind of assuming this means they want to potentially hard cast subtlety. But we're looking for like one more land really so I could Thoughtseize, hold up, so that I could Thoughtseize, hold up fetch to show lethal and like force the chump block. I would know their last card, Subtlety, hoping they don't top deck a Cascade spell for this one turn. And as soon as they don't and pass back, I feel like I'm pretty free and in the clear. And now even if they flash in Subtlety to attack or block or whatever, that's A-okay. I don't care about that. I've got Counterspell for the Living End. Go for the double chump. Pass the turn. I could cast Preordain, but like there's no real reason to because again, I just have Counterspell. Them not doing anything is like a dead giveaway that either they're dead or they have Subtlety. And those are the only options I could possibly think of. So I'm going to attack. They're going to cast a Subtlety. We will Counterspell and move on to game 2. I guess they could have like an Endurance, but same result. Sideboarding against Living End. I will mention I do sideboard pretty minimally in this matchup. I just bring out the Fatal Pushes, the Dismember, bring in the Unlicensed Hearses, the Force Negations, and I can't remember if I had a Flusterstorm in this matchup or not, but that. You could bring in Consigned to Memory because it does counter the Cascade trigger off of something like Shardless Agent. I found that for me personally, I don't feel like I need it, and there's nothing I want to cut that's better, or nothing I can cut that Consigned to Memory is better than. I don't want to cut like Thoughtseize. I don't want to cut actual Counterspell because if the game turns into my opponent just hard casting big things, I want Counterspell, not Consigned to Memory. I don't want to cut threats. I can't really afford to cut draw spells because I need to be able to find my threats. So that's kind of the... Hope you saw the 4 bobble hand there to start. Not the same as 4 Street Wraith. So we got a Grief to take my Preordain. I do have a second copy and got these Street Wraiths that could be anything. But yeah, like I was saying, I don't really feel like I've missed having Consigned to Memory is just a take the, or Consigned to Memory is counter the Cascade trigger because there's just nothing else that I want to take out. Get down to Nethergoyf. So play the Undercity Sewers here to try to help myself surveil into a Counterspell. But since I ended up just like finding the Flusterstorm first, I was fine tapping low to play the Sewers. That way I have more mana available to me next turn when I Preordain. So if I find Counterspell or Drown in the Lock, I've got that available. So it's just about trying to maximize my mana availability over the next couple turns. Thoughtseize, great pickup. It's a force negation, which means I kind of have to preordain here. Finding another Thoughtseize, obviously very nice, but I can't really, like, not do anything. I can't bluff in a situation. You shouldn't bluff in a situation where your opponent has to go for it. So if they had found a Cascade spell, like, they have to go for it. So it doesn't really do me any good to not cast the Preordain and just hold up 2 blue mana. Yeah, they archive away an island, draw dead. We have a Drown in the Lock. Nice. On to match number 5. Pretty smooth league outside of that Eldrazi match, but we're on the draw against the Giganta deck with Marsh Flats. I assume it's Boros Energy, which makes me really, really glad that my opponent doesn't have a 1-drop here. So if I'm able to Fatal Push like an Ajani, obviously them surveilling over a Flage is a bit of a hassle. Say a bit of a hassle. It's a big hassle. Let's be honest here. Flage is annoying. I can't really do anything about a Bowmaster here. I mean, I could drown it, but I don't want to really fight over a Bowmaster if I don't have to. I'd rather save this drown for something on their turn, like maybe they fetch and go for a Fable, and I can counter that. If they don't do anything relevant, then I can try to go for the kill on the Bowmaster if I want. Which this was the kill to try to be as mana efficient as possible. Plus, if they get back the Flage, my drown's dead anyway. So I might as well just like let them have that. Then hold up the fetch land in case they find some way to get Flage back. I don't think they can this turn. Guess they can just hard cast another one. Oh, this was a pretty cool point. So my opponent goes for Flage, targeting my Shadow. I could just fetch and shock and go that route. I'm assuming since they shocked in the Sacred Foundry that they've got a Galvanic Discharge. I could, so yeah, like I said, I could fetch and shock. They resolve the Flage, and now my Shadow is a 6/6 with 3 damage marked on it. And if I go to crack the fetch, they can respond with Galvanic Discharge and potentially kill my Shadow. So instead, we cycle the Street Wraith. So now if they go for the Galvanic Discharge, I can fetch in response. But if they don't discharge on their turn, then I can just go to my turn, have my Shadow back as a 5/5 with no damage marked on it, and fetch safely without being up Schitt's Creek if they decide to discharge in response to the fetch. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Cycling Wraith so that I'm not, so that they have to make the first action with discharge, and I'm not putting myself dead to responding with the fetch. If I fetch and shock first, I also lose Revolt if I fetch and shock. That was the other thing here, was if I fetch, I lose Revolt. So cycling the Street Wraith means that they can go for the Galvanic Discharge into the Shadow, but they know that I can negate it with fetching and shocking. But I'm hoping this means that they won't go for it, so I can keep the Flooded Strand around to be able to fetch and shock when they get the Flage back. And the added benefit is I go to my turn, the damage is removed, and now I just have a Shadow. So opponent chumps. We're going to play out a couple Shadows. Just hold up, force, and fatal push. If they get back Flage, we Fatal Push that. We have Force for any like follow-up discharge or something. Or if they have a Lightning Bolt and they decide to go at my face, I can counter that. But since they go for killing the Shadow or dealing damage to the Shadow instead of me, then I just get to Fetch Shock, Fatal Push the Flage. I've got Force Negation for anything on their turn, untap, Counterspell for anything on mine, and attack with Lethal Shadows. Sideboarding against Boros. Street Wraiths, I think, are like an auto 4 of cut. Their deck is just too aggressive, too explosive, or Mardu. Same thing against Boros. Street Wraith, auto cut against both. Too aggressive, too explosive. You can't afford to just lose life for nothing. Stubborn Denial, I think, is pretty meh. It's good the more like unlicensed hearses and fables, galvanic discharge, bolts you see, but it gets worse the more Ocelot, Pride, Guide of Souls, Raptor, Bowmaster, Flage that you see. So you really have to take it with a grain of salt based on what you've seen your opponent play in the first game. And in this case, knowing they're on Mardu, I saw Raptor, Flage, Bowmaster. I assume a Johnny's in their deck. I'm kind of okay trimming Force, or cutting Force, trimming on Stub, and boarding out all the Thoughtseizes, and then bringing in Blood Chief's Thirst, the 2 Toxic Deluge, the Meat Hook Massacre, the 3 Stern Scoldings, and the 2 Unlicensed Hearse to help fight over Flage a bit. So, surprisingly good opening hand. You don't see those a lot against the energy decks. But having access to Stern Scolding on turn 2 for like a Raptor or a Johnny or something like that. We could Thoughtseize on 1, but kind of the same reasoning that I gave against Tron. I don't want to Thoughtseize and then my opponent just have like a Johnny and a Raptor. And I take one, they resolve the other, and all of a sudden I'm way behind because I didn't just hold up Stern Scolding. And then I am finding myself doing a better job in this matchup compared to previous runs of like really fighting over specific 2-for-1s that matter instead of just any generic thing that my opponent plays out. Like here, I'm Fatal Pushing instead of Stern Scolding. That way I can get down... I got to talk about the decision making here. And I know y'all are probably getting sick of me like breaking down little lines like this. Decision making for Fatal Pushing instead of Stern Scolding on the Guide of Souls is because the Guide is not inherently a 2-for-1. So letting it resolve and Fatal Pushing is fine. But if I Stern Scolding and my opponent's able to follow up with like an Ajani or a Raptor, like an actual 2-for-1, and I've got a Fatal Push, then I fall behind for kind of no real reason there. And since I've got the Unlicensed Hearse coming down, I don't have to worry about Fatal Push coming back. I can focus more on counter spells instead of focusing on trying to be like tempo efficient. Pick up a Blood Chief's Thirst, a Meat Hook Massacre. And all I'm really doing now is like, let's see if I can find a Nethergoyf. Galvanic Discharge, not doing anything to the Unlicensed Hearse. And looks like they're just going to double discharge down the Goyf. That's okay because I don't know if you're aware, but Nethergoyf has this fun little text where you can get it back. Then like here, just like the Guide of Souls, the Ocelot just getting played out doesn't do anything that I care about. If they followed it up with like a Flage, I could counterspell the Flage, stop them from getting the life gain. But being able to just like 1-for-1 interact with the Ocelot is a pretty big deal. And then countering the Ocelot there because I want the board to be clear when I untap so that I can start just like, you know, beating face with The unlicensed hearse. I was planning on just getting back the Nethergoyf in the yard and crewing the hearse and hitting for 8. But when I drew another Nethergoyf, I was like, oh, that's, just as good. Which they do kill off the Nethergoyf, but I have Counterspell plus Shadow to recrew the hearse or get back the Nethergoyf from the yard, whichever one I fancy. Either way, my opponent is going to take 8 off of the big unlicensed hearse. They scoop it up. And that is match number 5. So getting to beat Boros Energy, really, or Mardu Energy, really nice way to finish off that league. Tron's weird. I think going up to the 4th consigned to memory would help a lot against Tron, but I'd probably have to cut something like the 3rd Sweeper or the 3rd Stern Scolding. And I think that my matchup against Boros is so much worse, such to a point that I would prefer to have a slightly worse Tron matchup to keep my Boros or Mardu Energy matchup solid than risk losing a lot of points in that matchup, in the Boros matchup, to like minorly increase my Tron matchup. So just kind of my thoughts there. Frog. Frog. So we went 4-1. The match that we lost, game 1, we lost with a frog. Albeit, I think any threat would have lost there, but it happened to be a frog, so frog's going to get the front of my blame here. Game 3, there's a chance we could have won with a Tamiyo, but frog giving our opponent an extra turn because the clock wasn't that relevant ended up getting us killed. But if Thought Knot attacked Tamiyo, then it probably didn't matter. Either way, frog pretty... Actually, I'll have to go back and look at that one. Because I might have a change of opinion here. Let's see if we can find this. What I want to know... I love how I just went like straight to... Okay. So this is what I wanted to know. Opponent played out their Thought Knot on turn 4. We would have flipped Tamiyo on turn 2. Which means we would have had a Tamiyo on 6 loyalty right now. But we wouldn't have been able to stop the Thought Knot Seer anyway with Force Negation and Flusterstorm. So we either could have ticked up the Tamiyo, which there's like no way they don't attack. We bottomed the Force Negation there. I don't remember what our next draw was. Guess we'll find out here. So we would have drawn a Flooded Strand. We could have preordained. I don't know. It's interesting to think about. Like, Tamiyo would have been flipped, would have had a chance at ulting, but probably wouldn't have ulted with the Thought Knot Seer anyway. So, oh well. Nethergoyf, fantastic. I think if you're expecting a lot of like blue-black, then Nethergoyf's a really excellent card to play into that matchup. Recursive, tough to deal with, grows pretty quickly. Psychic Frog I actually think is a bit of a liability against that deck since you can't do anything against any of their removal for an advantage. The Tamiyos are pretty good because if you're able to play her out and flip her in one turn, especially if your opponent's like tapped out, that means no Fatal Push, no Drown in the lock. So you do get to dodge a good bit. And just rebuying like counter spells and Thought Seizes in those matchups is very, very good. So yeah. Like maybe y'all are seeing something with Frog that I'm not. I know the combo with Murktide has got a lot of people interested in playing more Frog. But I'm still a very firm believer that, hey, if I've got a Murktide and my Murktide's living, I don't need to ditch half my hand to Frog to, like, make it one turn faster. I could just have my hand and win with Murktide. Because if I'm ditching Frog to grow the Murktide, I'm ditching live spells. And if I have live spells, my entire deck's just counter spells. So I can just have my counter spells and counter the things and kill with Murktide. Like, there's very, very few situations where you have to win right this turn and couldn't win next turn when your hand's just chock full of counter spells. Yeah. I don't know. I'm still so up in the air and like what threats I want. I still firmly believe that Tamiyo has won me more games than any other threat would have won in the same situations. So that plays a really big part in that decision. Like, I don't know how many games Frog wins that another threat would have just won as well. Like Shadow or Nethergoyf would have just won. Against like Eldrazi, if I've got a Frog down hitting for what, like 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, that's cool. Is it better than a Shadow just hitting for like 6 and 6 and 6? Hard to say. Depends on how often the drawing cards off the Frog are relevant. But against decks that clog up the board, against decks that go wide with like Ocelot Pride, Tamiyo like just ticking up has been such a huge stonewall effect against those. Against the Nantuko decks, against Ocelot Pride, just being able to say like, all right, none of these tokens matter anymore. And then I'll get to a certain point where I'll ult Tamiyo and then I'll figure out something to do with them at that. Like, let's say your opponent's got a board of Ocelot Pride and a bunch of tokens, and you're able to ult Tamiyo. From there, you can find a way to like kill the Ocelot Prides, get some tokens or get some threats down, hold up counterspell, whatever. It's not easy. Not always a guaranteed win, but it's a pretty good spot to be. And I do think it's more effective than Psychic Frog in those spots. But I don't know. I'm hoping people watching the video will help try out some options as well. And then we can brainstorm, collaborate, see what's working, what's not. Other than that, hope everybody enjoyed the video. Thank you all so much for sticking around and checking it out. As always, have an awesome rest of your week. Stay safe, enjoy some good food and company, and I will catch y'all back live later. Adios for now.